She's probably still cleaning toilets somewhere, my stepbrother laughed, raising his champagne glass at his wedding reception. The entire ballroom erupted in laughter, including my mother, who sat at the head table in her emerald dress, diamonds glittering at her throat. I stood frozen in the back of the room, my hand gripping the acquisition papers in my $50,000 Valentino clutch. 5 years. 5 years since they'd beaten me bloody for refusing to iron his shirts. 5 years since I'd crawled out of that house with exactly $1 and shoes held together with duct tape. And now here I was, invisible in the shadows of their perfect celebration, about to destroy everything they'd built on my father's grave. The wedding coordinator, my employee, though they didn't know it, gave me a subtle nod. It was time. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "we have a special surprise from someone who couldn't be here today, but wanted to share in this joyous occasion." My stepfather, Richard Stewart, straightened his bow tie and smiled, that politician smile I'd learned to fear as a child. "Probably another congratulations video from our investors," he said loudly, already drunk on expensive whiskey and his own arrogance. The lights dimmed. The massive screen behind the head table flickered to life. But instead of congratulations, a different image appeared, my father's original patent documents, dated 3 months before his death. "What the hell is this?" Richard's voice cracked. Then came my voice, pre-recorded and crystal clear. "Hello, Mother. Hello, Richard. I thought your guests might be interested to know how Stewart Industries really began." My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. She'd recognized my voice, the voice of the daughter she'd helped beat unconscious, the daughter she'd told would never amount to anything, the daughter she'd erased from every family photo. The presentation continued, methodically displaying the evidence I'd spent 4 years gathering. Patent transfers dated suspiciously close to my father's funeral. Forged signatures I'd had 3 handwriting experts verify. Bank records showing payments to the lawyer who'd mysteriously lost my father's will. "Turn it off," Richard roared. But the hotel staff, all contractually bound to my subsidiary company, stood motionless. I stepped out of the shadows then, my heels clicking against the marble with the rhythm of a countdown. Every head in the room turned. My stepbrother's jaw dropped, his new bride forgotten. My mother's face had gone the color of old parchment. "Hello, family," I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "Surprised to see me. I know you thought I'd disappeared forever when I left with that $1. The $1 I found in your couch cushions, Mother, while my back was still bleeding from Richard's belt." Richard lunged forward, but his own security team, who'd received new employment contracts that morning, stepped smoothly between us. "I wouldn't," I said calmly. "You're standing in my hotel. Those are my security guards. The catering staff, the photographers, even the officiant who married your son. They all work for companies I own." I pulled the documents from my clutch. "And as of 9 a.m. this morning, I own 73% of Stewart Industries. Congratulations on the wedding, stepbrother. It's the last party you'll throw on my father's money." The room exploded into chaos. Phones appeared, recording everything. The stepbrother's new in-laws looked horrified. Business associates began backing toward the exits. But I wasn't finished. "Oh, and Mother," I turned to the woman who'd held me down, while her husband beat me, who'd chosen her new family over her own daughter. "That house you live in? The one bought with my father's life insurance? I purchased the mortgage last month. You have 30 days to vacate. She finally found her voice, shrill and desperate. You can't do this. I'm your mother. No, I said quietly, and somehow the softness of my voice silenced the room more effectively than any shout. You were my mother. You stopped being that. The night you held me down and told me I was worthless, just like my father. The night you watched your husband beat your teenage daughter unconscious and then locked the door so I couldn't come back inside. I walked to the head table, my heels the only sound in the stunned silence. I placed a single white envelope next to the shattered champagne glass. Inside, you'll find a check for $1. We're even now. As I turned to leave, Richard finally spoke, his voice thick with rage and alcohol. You think you've won? You think destroying us makes you better than us? I paused at the ballroom door, looking back at the ruins of their perfect day. I don't need to be better than you, Richard. I just needed to become someone you could never hurt again. And now? I smiled, the kind of smile I'd learned in boardrooms while buying up their debts piece by piece. Now you're just a cautionary tale I'll tell at business school lectures. The man who stole from the dead and lost to a girl he thought was nothing. The last thing I saw before the doors closed was my mother's face, finally understanding that the daughter she'd tried to break had become the woman who broke them instead. Success isn't loud, it's the quiet accumulation of evidence while your enemies toast to their false victories. And revenge? Sometimes it comes dressed in Valentino, holding the keys to everything they thought was theirs. The cruelest lies we tell ourselves are the ones about family. I was 14 when my father died, a sudden heart attack at his desk, working late on what would become the patents that built an empire. The last thing he'd said to me was, "Take care of your mother, princess. She's going to need you." I tried. God, how I tried. But grief makes people into strangers, and my mother became someone I didn't recognize. She cleared out his office before his body was cold, threw away his clothes while I begged her to save just one shirt that still smelled like his cologne. We need to move forward, she said, her eyes as empty as the spaces where his pictures used to hang. 3 months. That's how long she waited before bringing Richard Stewart home. This is your new father, she announced, like fathers were interchangeable parts. You could swap out when one broke. Richard smiled at me, with teeth too white and eyes too calculating, while his son, 2 years older and already 6 feet of entitled arrogance, looked me up and down like I was furniture he was deciding whether to keep. She's smaller than I expected, the son Marcus said, not to me, about me, like I wasn't standing right there. She'll do, Richard replied, and I should have known then what was coming, should have heard the sentence in those 2 words. But I was 14 and grieving and desperate to believe my mother still loved me enough to protect me. The changes started small. My bedroom, the one my father had painted, pale yellow because it was my favorite color, suddenly needed to become Marcus's gaming room. The basement is finished, my mother explained, not meeting my eyes. You'll have more privacy down there. The basement was cold concrete and exposed pipes. No windows, one outlet. A mattress on the floor because bed frames are expensive and we need to be smart with money now. This from the woman wearing a new tennis bracelet Richard had bought her. Then came the chores, not normal household responsibilities. I'd always helped my dad with those. This was different. This was servitude disguised as contributing to the family. Marcus would leave his dishes in his room until they grew mold, then dump them in my bed if I didn't collect them fast enough. His laundry had to be sorted by color, fabric, and preference. Whites with whites, but his white soccer uniform separate from his white casual clothes. Everything ironed, including his underwear, because successful men pay attention to details. "It's good practice for when you're a wife," my mother would say, watching from the kitchen doorway as I scrubbed grass stains from Marcus's jeans at midnight. Not everyone gets to marry successful men. Some of us have to earn our keep. The worst part wasn't the work, it was the erasure. Family photos began disappearing one by one. First from the hallway, we're redecorating. Then from the living room, these old frames don't match the new furniture. Finally, even from my mother's bedside table, I found them in the garbage one night, my father's face staring up at me from between coffee grounds and eggshells. At school events, I learned to walk several feet behind them. Richard would introduce Marcus as my son headed for Harvard, while I became, and this is, followed by an awkward pause, like he'd forgotten my name. My mother never corrected him, never said, "This is my daughter." Just smiled that empty smile and changed the subject. Parent-teacher conferences became solo missions. I forged signatures on report cards, straight A's that no one celebrated, honor roll certificates that went straight into my backpack because there was no space on the refrigerator next to Marcus's participation trophies. "Why do you insist on making things difficult?" my mother asked one night when I'd begged her to come to my science fair. I'd won first place for a project on sustainable energy. My father would have been so proud. Marcus has a soccer game. We're a family now. We support each other. "What about supporting me?" I'd asked, still naive enough to think the question mattered. She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "You have a roof over your head, food to eat. What more do you want?" Love, I didn't say. To matter, I couldn't voice. To exist as more than an inconvenient ghost in my own home. The lock on my bedroom door, the basement door, disappeared one day. "Privacy is earned," Richard informed me when I protested. "And you haven't been pulling your weight." Marcus says his shirts weren't pressed properly. I started doing homework in the library, staying until they closed at 9. Then I'd walk the long way home, sometimes sitting in the park, until I saw their bedroom lights go off. It was safer to slip in when they were asleep, to grab whatever leftovers remained, if any, and retreat to my concrete cave. One teacher noticed, Mrs. Chen, who taught AP chemistry and had known my father from his guest lectures at the school. "You look tired, sweetie," she said one day, studying the dark circles under my eyes. "Is everything okay at home?" I almost told her. Almost broke down right there in the chemistry lab, surrounded by the same elements my father had loved. But then I thought about foster care, about losing even the basement and the last threads connecting me to my father's memory. "Everything's fine," I lied, becoming complicit in my own invisibility. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but she also didn't push. Instead, she started leaving granola bars on my desk, staying late to organize supplies while I did homework in her classroom, writing college recommendation letters that called me resilient and remarkably independent, without ever saying why I'd had to be. The day I turned 16, no one remembered. I came home to find a party in full swing. Marcus had made the varsity team. My mother had baked his favorite cake, invited his friends, strung up congratulations banners in school colors. I stood in the doorway, invisible even on what should have been my day, watching my mother fuss over Marcus's hair while Richard filmed everything for the family memories. That's when I understood I wasn't forgotten. You can only forget something that mattered in the first place. I was erased, deliberately, methodically, completely. But here's what they didn't understand about erasure. It's not the same as destruction. You can make someone invisible, but you can't make them disappear. And in the shadows where they forced me to live, I learned to see everything they thought was hidden. Every lie, every theft, every crime that would eventually become their undoing. Some moments shatter you so completely that you have no choice but to rebuild yourself as someone entirely new. It was Marcus's 18th birthday, a Saturday in October, the kind of crisp fall day that used to mean raking leaves with my father and jumping into the piles until we were both covered in gold and crimson. But in the Stewart house, it meant something else entirely. The Crown Prince's coming of age. The preparations had started a week before. Professional party planners, catered food, a DJ from the city. My mother spent more on flowers than our monthly grocery budget. Richard rented a tent that transformed our backyard into what looked like a country club gala. My job, naturally, was to serve. Not just serve, Marcus corrected me that morning, dropping a package on my basement mattress. You're going to do it properly. Inside was a maid's outfit, not a subtle one, the kind designed to humiliate, complete with a frilly apron and a skirt so short it barely qualified as clothing. The tag was still on it, $89.99. He'd paid $90 to humiliate me. I have a scholarship interview, I said quietly. At the university, it's at 4. Marcus laughed, that sound I'd learned to fear more than his father's anger. Did I ask about your plans? This is my day. You'll wear this, you'll serve my guests, and you'll smile while you do it. Or I'll tell my father you've been stealing from the house. I haven't. Who do you think he'll believe? The interview was for a full ride to study biomedical engineering, my father's field. I'd been preparing for months, staying up late in the library to practice, writing and rewriting my essays on school computers. Because I wasn't allowed to use the one at home, this was my chance, maybe my only chance, to escape. I looked at the outfit, then at Marcus's smirking face. No. The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. I'd never said it before, never refused, never pushed back, never been anything but the invisible servant they'd trained me to be. His face went red, then purple. What did you say? I said no. My voice was steadier than my hands. I'm going to my interview. He left without another word. I should have known that was worse than any threat. I got dressed in my only professional outfit. A blazer I'd bought at Goodwill and tailored myself, a skirt that was respectable if outdated, shoes I'd polished until they almost looked new. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror I'd propped against the basement wall and saw something I hadn't seen in years. My father's determination in my eyes. I made it to the front door before Richard's voice stopped me. Going somewhere? He stood in the living room doorway, still in his golf clothes, his leather belt already in his hand. My mother sat on the couch behind him, examining her manicure like it was the most interesting thing in the world. I have an interview, I said. For college, a scholarship. Marcus says you refused to help with his party. I offered to help before or after. The interview is only an hour. You don't make the rules in this house." He stepped forward, wrapping the belt around his fist. "You're nothing here, nothing but what we allow you to be, and today we need you to serve." "Dad," I said deliberately, watching his face contort at the word, "would have wanted me to go to this interview. That was my mistake, mentioning my father, reminding them of the man they'd robbed, the life they'd stolen, the legacy they'd built their comfort on." Richard's first swing caught me across the shoulders. I tried to run, but my mother, my own mother, grabbed my wrists, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "You ungrateful little brat," she hissed, her breath sweet with afternoon wine. "We feed you, house you, and this is how you repay us? By throwing your dead father in our faces?" The belt came down again. And again, I stopped counting at 10, stopped fighting at 15, stopped feeling at 20. My mother held me the entire time, whispering poison in my ear. "You're nothing special? Just like your worthless father. Should have died instead of him. At least then I'd have life insurance money without the burden." Each word hurt more than the belt. Each word carved away another piece of the daughter I'd tried so hard to be, the girl who'd promised her father she'd take care of her mother. When Richard finally stopped, when my back was on fire and my blazer was ruined with blood, he wasn't even breathing hard. "The outfit's on your bed," he said calmly, like he'd just finished a reasonable discussion. "You have 10 minutes to change and get upstairs. Don't make me come get you." They left me on the floor, stepped over me like I was a pile of dirty laundry. I heard my mother's laugh from upstairs, bright and tinkling, as she greeted the first party guests. I lay there for 5 minutes, maybe 10, feeling the blood soak through my shirt, listening to the party sounds above. Then something strange happened. The pain faded into background noise, and in its place came clarity, crystal clear, diamond-sharp clarity. They were never going to let me leave. Not for college, not for a job, not for a life. I was their prisoner, their servant, their punching bag. And if I stayed, I would die here, maybe not physically, but in every way that mattered. I pushed myself up, each movement agony, and made it to the basement. I changed clothes, not into the maid outfit, but into jeans and my father's old MIT sweatshirt I'd hidden under the mattress. I packed a plastic bag with 2 changes of clothes, my father's watch I'd managed to save, and my school notebooks. Then I went hunting for money. I found it in the couch cushions, a single dollar bill, crumpled and forgotten. I almost laughed, $1 to buy my freedom. My father would have appreciated the irony. I couldn't go out the front door, too many guests. But the basement had a window, small and high, that I'd never tried to open before. It took 3 tries and reopened 2 of the welts on my back. But finally, it gave way. I pulled myself through that window, leaving skin and blood on the concrete, and dropped into the side yard. I could hear the party in full swing, hear Marcus's booming laugh, hear my mother playing the perfect hostess. To people who had no idea what had just happened in her living room, I walked to the library first, cleaned myself up in the bathroom as best I could, then caught the last bus downtown. I had no plan beyond survive. No idea what I'd do when the dollar ran out. No concept of how I'd build anything from nothing. But I had something they'd never understand, something they couldn't beat out of me. My father's mind, his brilliance, his innovation, his belief that anyone could change the world with the right idea and enough determination. At the bus station, I used the phone to leave one message on our home answering machine, knowing they wouldn't check it until after the party. "This is your daughter," I said, not bothering with names. "The one you beat unconscious for wanting an education. I want you to know that I'm not running away. I'm running toward everything you tried to deny me, toward the person my father knew I could be. And one day, when you least expect it, I'll be back. Not for revenge, for justice. Enjoy the party. It's the last one you'll throw with his money." I hung up and boarded the bus with my dollar, my plastic bag, and my father's voice in my head. "Take care of yourself, princess. You're going to do amazing things." They thought they broke me that night. They were right. They broke the girl who believed in family, who thought love could survive greed, who hoped her mother would choose her. But from those broken pieces, someone else stood up, someone who understood that sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing by their rules entirely, someone who knew that $1 and determination could be worth more than all their stolen wealth. They broke a girl. They created their worst nightmare. The public library became my first headquarters. Open 24 hours on weekdays, security guards who looked the other way, when exhausted students dozed off in the study rooms, and most importantly, free computer access. That first night, I slept sitting upright in a chair, my father's sweatshirt pulled over my face, waking every hour when my back reminded me why I was there. By morning, I had a plan. Not a complete one, but enough to start. The dollar bought me bus fare to the university. The scholarship interview I'd missed was gone forever, but universities have other resources. I slipped into lecture halls, sitting in the back of computer science and business classes, absorbing everything while my stomach cramped from hunger. "Excuse me, miss, are you enrolled here?" A professor caught me after a coding seminar, his eyes taking in my disheveled appearance. The truth came out before I could stop it. "No, but I need to learn this. I'll sit in the back. I won't disrupt anything. I need to learn." Dr. Martinez studied me for a long moment. Then, "Can you code at all?" "Basic HTML, some JavaScript. I've been teaching myself at the library." "The tech lab needs someone to clean up after hours. Minimum wage, but you'd have access to the computers overnight. Interested?" I could have kissed him. Instead, I managed a professional, "Yes, sir, thank you." Those first months were brutal. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. cleaning the lab, then stayed until noon, learning everything I could. Sleep happened in 2-hour increments on the bus or in empty classrooms. Meals were vending machine, leftovers, and free samples from the student union. But I was learning. More than learning, I was building. My first app was simple, a scheduling optimizer for small businesses. Nothing revolutionary, but I'd noticed the campus coffee shop losing customers because of inefficient shift planning. I offered it to them for free in exchange for leftover pastries. They saved $3,000 in the first month. Word spread. Within 6 months, I had paying clients, small businesses around campus who needed tech solutions but couldn't afford big firms. I reinvested every penny, sleeping in the lab most nights, showering at the campus gym with a membership I'd bartered for by building their booking system. That's when I found it. I was researching patent law for a client when my father's name appeared in a search result. Innovative biosensor technology for medical diagnostics, filed 3 months before his death. But the patent holder listed wasn't his name. It was a company called MedTech Innovations, LLC. My hands shook as I dug deeper. MedTech Innovations registered 2 weeks after my father's funeral. Primary shareholder, Richard Stewart. The rage that flooded through me could have burned down the entire lab. But I forced it down, channeled it into something more useful. Cold, calculating determination. I printed everything, started a file that would grow to fill 3 boxes over the next 2 years. By year 2, my company, registered under an alias, was worth $2 million. I hired other students, moved operations to a real office, started attending industry conferences in second-hand suits that I tailored to look expensive. No one recognized the beaten girl in the basement when she wore Armani and spoke fluent venture capital. Marcus's social media made surveillance easy. He documented every excess, every failure to launch, every time his father bailed him out of another failed business venture. He'd graduated, barely, and was working at Stewart Industries in a position created specifically for him, Executive Vice President of Innovation. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother had embraced her role as society wife completely. Charity galas where she spent more on her dress than most people's monthly salaries. Spa retreats to recover from the stress of planning parties. Not a single photo of her first daughter anywhere. Year 3 brought the breakthrough. A military contractor needed encryption software for medical devices. The proposal required biosensor integration, my father's specialty. I spent 72 hours straight building the prototype, his patents, the real ones I'd found in academic archives, guiding every line of code. We won the contract, $50 million. Remarkable work, the general said at the signing. This biosensor integration is years ahead of anything else we've seen. Where did you study? MIT, I lied smoothly. My father was an alumnus. With real money came real power. I started buying strategically. Not Stewart Industries directly, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I targeted their ecosystem, their suppliers, their creditors, their clients, slowly, quietly, like a spider spinning an invisible web. The private investigator I hired found more than patent theft, embezzlement, tax evasion, SEC violations that Richard had buried with bribes and threats, every crime documented, every trail preserved. I wasn't building a case for court. Statute of limitations had passed on much of it. I was building something better, leverage. Year 4 was when I started appearing at the same conferences as Richard. Always in the background, always in disguise, colored contacts, a wig, the kind of subtle changes that transformed without looking like a costume. I watched him give keynotes about innovative thinking and building from nothing, fighting the urge to scream the truth. One conference in Chicago I couldn't resist. During the Q&A, I stood up. Mr. Stewart, your biosensor technology is impressive. Can you tell us about the original development? The patents seem to predate your company's founding. He stammered through a non-answer about acquisitions and intellectual property transfers. I sat down, satisfied by the sweat on his forehead, the way his eyes scanned the crowd, trying to identify the threat. By the end of year 4, I controlled 60% of Stewart Industries' supply chain. They had no idea their biggest competitor was also their largest creditor. The loans I'd bought were all coming due within 6 months, the perfect timeline for what I had planned. I scheduled the takeover announcement for Marcus's wedding day. Not because I needed to. I could have destroyed them quietly, professionally in a boardroom, but because I wanted them to feel what I'd felt. To have their moment of perfect happiness shattered by someone they'd dismissed as nothing. The night before, I stood outside my childhood home. They'd renovated, of course, added a pool, a tennis court, all the trappings of wealth built on theft and abuse. My old basement window had been sealed with concrete. I thought about knocking, announcing myself early, but then I heard laughter from inside, my mother's voice mixing with strangers, the clink of wine glasses, the sound of a family that had erased me so completely they probably didn't even remember what they'd done. No, they'd remember soon enough. I drove away in my Tesla, back to my penthouse office, where 3 lawyers and 2 accountants were preparing the final documentation. On my desk sat a photo, the only one I'd managed to save. My father and me at his lab, both of us in safety goggles, grinning at the camera after a successful experiment. "Almost there, Dad," I whispered to the photo. "Just like you taught me. Hypothesis, experiment, result." They thought they were the experiment. They never realized they were just the hypothesis about to be disproven. Power isn't about the money you accumulate or the companies you build. It's about becoming someone your enemies never see coming. They looked for me in homeless shelters and obituaries. They never thought to look in boardrooms and Forbes lists. That's the thing about erasing someone. You also erase your ability to see them coming back. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom was a monument to excess. Marcus had chosen gold and ivory everything, tablecloths, flowers, even the bride's dress had gold threading that caught the light like scattered coins. 500 guests, a 10-piece band, and a cake that cost more than most people's cars. I arrived precisely at 8:47 p.m., timing calculated to the minute. The father-daughter dance would end at 8:45, the best man speech at 8:50. I had a 3-minute window where attention would be scattered, glasses would be refilled, and the security team would be rotating shifts. My invitation, procured through channels Richard would never think to monitor, listed me as a +1 for a pharmaceutical executive who'd canceled last minute. The name on the seating chart, Sarah Chen, meaningless, forgettable, perfect. I wore Valentino because I could, because the girl who'd crawled through a basement window with $1 deserved to walk through their front door in $50,000 of Italian craftsmanship. The dress was midnight blue, the color of deep water, where light doesn't reach, appropriate for drowning empires. "Champagne, miss," a server appeared at my elbow, one of mine, though she didn't know her company had been acquired through 3 shell corporations. "Not yet," I murmured, watching Richard work the room like the politician he'd never quite managed to become. "But keep the glasses coming for table 12, especially the groom." I'd studied the guest list like a battle plan. Table 1, immediate family. Richard, my mother. Marcus, the bride's parents. Table 2 through 5, business associates, all either indebted to Stewart Industries or invested in its success. Tables 6 through 10, extended family and friends. Tables 11 through 20, the ecosystem I'd been slowly purchasing for 4 years. The wedding coordinator, my employee for the last 6 months, caught my eye and nodded. Everything was in place. I circulated carefully, keeping to shadows and crowds, always at angles where my mother's line of sight was blocked. 4 years of surveillance had taught me her patterns. She looked left when she laughed, tilted her head right when drinking, never turned around at parties because important people were always in front of you. At 8:50 exactly, the best man began his speech. Generic platitudes about brotherhood and loyalty. I positioned myself near the AV station where my technical team had spent 3 hours that morning upgrading the equipment. And now, the best man concluded, Marcus's father has prepared a special presentation about the happy couple. Richard stood, straightening his custom tuxedo, that same politician's smile stretching across his face. The lights dimmed. The screen descended. He clicked the remote with the confidence of a man who'd never been challenged. The first slide appeared. Stewart Industries, a legacy of innovation. He clicked again, but instead of wedding photos, the screen filled with patent documents. My father's patents, the real ones. What? Richard's voice cracked. He clicked frantically, but the presentation had a life of its own now. Financial records, transfer documents with signatures that 3 handwriting experts had confirmed were forgeries. Bank statements showing payments to lawyers who'd been mysteriously disbarred shortly after my father's death. Email threads retrieved through completely legal corporate acquisitions, discussing removing obstacles and securing assets before the widow realizes their value. The room had gone silent except for the hum of the projector and someone's champagne glass hitting the floor. Then my voice filled the ballroom, pre-recorded and processed through the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing the true foundation of Stewart Industries. Built not on innovation, but on theft. Not on merit, but on forgery. Not on a man's vision, but on his widow's betrayal and a dead man's stolen dreams. Turn it off, Richard roared, but the AV team had vanished. Security moved toward the equipment, but more guards, my guards, stepped smoothly into their path. The presentation continued relentlessly. Screenshots of Marcus's social media posts about parasites living off successful families. The security footage, how had I gotten that, of a teenage girl being thrown out of a house in the middle of the night, bloody and beaten. Audio recordings of Richard at board meetings, taking credit for innovations designed by men he'd had fired weeks before. My mother had gone white, not pale, white, like paper about to burn. That's when I stepped into the light. Hello, family. The gasp that went through the room was worth every night I'd slept hungry, worth every scar on my back, worth 4 years of 80-hour weeks and careful planning. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking on marble with metronomic precision. Phones appeared in hands, recording everything. The pharmaceuticals executives at table 12 looked intrigued. The investors at tables 3 and 4 looked terrified. They knew that walk. They'd seen it in boardrooms before hostile takeovers. Security, Richard's voice had climbed an octave. Remove this woman. I'm afraid they can't do that, I said pleasantly. You see, Titan Security was acquired by Phoenix Holdings last month. And Phoenix Holdings is owned by Chen Enterprises, which is owned by... I smiled, the kind of smile I'd learned from watching him destroy competitors. Me. Marcus tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. Too much champagne, too much shock. His bride, poor thing, she had no idea what she'd married into, clutched his arm with her gold-threaded sleeves. You're lying, my mother whispered. You're nobody. You left with nothing. You were nothing. $1, I corrected, pulling the acquisition papers from my clutch. I left with $1 and a promise to succeed, where you tried to ensure I'd fail. And I did succeed, Mother, beyond your wildest nightmares. I began listing the acquisitions, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. Stewart Industries' primary steel supplier, mine. Your trucking company, mine. The bank that holds your corporate loans, mine. The law firm that's protected your secrets. They work for me now. Even this hotel, this ballroom, this wedding, you're celebrating in my building, eating my food, dancing to my music. The house, my mother's voice was barely a whisper. 30 days' notice, I confirmed, though I'm willing to extend that to 60 if you leave quietly. The divorce lawyers I've retained for you, yes, Mother, I hired them last week. Tell me Richard's prenuptial agreement has some interesting loopholes, especially the clause about undisclosed criminal activities. Richard lunged then, 60 years old, and still thinking violence would solve his problems. But I'd been expecting it, hoping for it, really. I stepped aside with the grace of someone who'd spent 4 years studying martial arts with the Navy SEALs who'd bought my encryption software. He stumbled past me, catching himself on a champagne tower that exploded in crystal and gold. Careful, I said mildly. That's a $50,000 security deposit you just forfeited. The bride's father stood up at table 1, his face a study in horrified realization. The merger. Cancelled, I confirmed. Stewart Industries doesn't have the assets to complete it. Not anymore. I called in the loans an hour ago. Check your phones, board members. The emergency meeting is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be presenting my controlling interest and my plans for restructuring. Richard won't be attending, neither will Marcus. You can't do this, Marcus slurred, champagne and shock making him brave. We're family. No, I said, and 4 years of preparation gave my voice the weight of absolute truth. Family doesn't beat children unconscious for wanting education. Family doesn't steal from the dead. Family doesn't erase daughters who remind them of their crimes. I turned to address the room at large, these witnesses to their destruction. Stewart Industries will continue operating under new management. All employees will keep their jobs, except for the executives involved in fraud. The patents will be re-registered under their rightful inventor's name, Dr. James Chen, my father. And this building, I gestured to the opulent ballroom, will become the Chen Foundation, providing scholarships for foster children and abuse survivors who need what I needed, a chance. The presentation had reached its final slide, a photo I'd treasured through 4 years of homelessness and hunger. My father and me in his lab, both of us smiling, both of us dreaming of the future he wouldn't live to see. This is what you stole, I said, my voice finally showing emotion. Not just patents, not just money. You stole a daughter's chance to make her father proud. You stole a brilliant man's legacy. You stole futures that should have been built on love, not lies. Security began escorting the Stewart family out. Not roughly, I wasn't them, but firmly, decisively, finally. My mother turned back at the door, mascara streaming down her face in black rivers. I'm your mother, she said, as if that meant anything anymore. Biologically, I agreed, but you stopped being my mother the night you held me down and called me worthless. The only good thing you ever did was underestimate me. It made all of this possible. As they disappeared into the night, I turned back to the stunned wedding guests. The band sat frozen, instruments silent. The cake stood uncut. its golden decorations now looking more like handcuffs than celebration. "I apologize for disrupting the celebration," I said with perfect corporate courtesy. "The bar will remain open, dinner will be served as planned, and each guest will receive a formal apology and compensation for the inconvenience." However, I smiled, and this time it reached my eyes. "I'd recommend the investors at tables 3 through 5 stay for an impromptu board meeting. We have a company to rebuild, this time on a foundation of truth. Justice doesn't require violence, it requires patience, planning, and the kind of power they never thought you could achieve. They built their empire on my father's grave. I simply dug it up and showed everyone what was buried underneath. I didn't stay to watch them crumble. That would have been beneath the woman I'd become." While security escorted the Stewart family through the lobby, I returned to the presidential suite I'd booked months ago. The same suite where Richard had celebrated his biggest deals, where he'd toasted to victories built on my father's bones. Now it was mine, like everything else he'd thought was permanent. My assistant, Diane, a foster kid who'd graduated summa cum laude from Harvard, had laid out the documents for tomorrow's board meeting, but I wasn't looking at those. Instead, I held a single white envelope, my name written across it in shaking script. Inside was a check for $1 and a photograph I'd never seen before. My parents on their wedding day, my father looking at my mother like she hung the stars. On the back, in my mother's young handwriting, forever and always. I'd found it in Richard's office safe, along with evidence that my mother had tried to stop the patent theft initially. The emails showed her resistance, then gradual capitulation, then active participation. Love hadn't turned to greed overnight. It had been a slow poisoning, each compromise making the next easier. "Ma'am," Diane knocked softly. "They're in the lobby. Security is asking how you'd like to proceed." I moved to the window, looking down at the valet station 20 floors below. I could see them, tiny figures in designer clothes that no longer meant anything. My mother clutched Richard's arm, but he shook her off, already calculating his next move. Marcus stumbled toward a car that wouldn't start. I'd had their vehicles disabled, a petty touch I couldn't resist. "Give them my car," I said. Diane blinked. "Your car? The Bentley?" "They'll need transportation. Have the driver take them wherever they want to go. One last ride in luxury before reality sets in." "That's surprisingly generous." "No," I corrected gently. "It's strategic. Every mile in that car, they'll know it's mine. Every comfort they experience tonight is something I'm allowing. By morning, when the prenuptial clauses activate and the divorces begin, they'll understand that even their escape was something I orchestrated." Through the window, I watched them climb into my Bentley. The driver, a veteran who'd lost his legs in Afghanistan and now ran my corporate fleet, held the door with military precision. Professional to the end, even for passengers who didn't deserve it. My phone buzzed. 14 missed calls from my mother, 3 from Richard, 27 from Marcus. I deleted them all unheard and opened a different app, the security feed from the house I'd grown up in. Moving trucks were already pulling into the driveway. My team worked efficiently, cataloging everything for the divorce proceedings. The basement window I'd escaped through had been my first renovation after buying the property, enlarged and turned into a proper entrance. A small plaque beside it read, "Emergency Exit Save Lives," donated by the Chen Foundation. "Ma'am," Diane said carefully, there's something else. We found this in Richard's personal files. She handed me a folder marked with my father's name. Inside were progress reports on his biosensor research, notes in Richard's handwriting about leveraging Jay's work after the transition, and most damning, a life insurance policy taken out on my father 2 weeks before his death, with Richard as the secondary beneficiary after my mother. My hands didn't shake. I'd moved past that kind of anger. But I did close my eyes and count to 10, a technique learned in therapy paid for with my first million. Send copies to the district attorney, I said quietly. Let them decide if it's worth investigating. I'm done being judge and jury. The wedding reception below had transformed into an impromptu business summit. Through the suite's surveillance feed, I watched investors huddling at tables, phones pressed to ears, calculating their positions in the new order. The bride's family had vanished, smart people cutting losses early. The wedding cake stood abandoned, its golden towers beginning to lean. At midnight, I made one last call. Chen Foundation, a warm voice answered. How can we help? This is Sarah, I said, using the name I'd built my empire under. I need you to process an anonymous donation, $10 million, designated for the scholarship fund. Priority given to applicants who've aged out of foster care or left abusive homes. That's incredibly generous. Would you like naming rights? A building, perhaps? No names, but include a message with the announcement. Success is the best revenge, but purpose is the best success. I ended the call and returned to the window. The city sparkled below, each light a life with its own struggles and triumphs. Somewhere out there was a girl like I'd been, sleeping in a library or a bus station, believing she was worthless because someone who should have loved her said so. What now? Diane asked. Now we build, I said. Not to destroy anyone, but to create something my father would have been proud of. Stewart Industries becomes Chen Innovations. We honor the patents, pay back everyone Richard cheated, and move forward. And your family. I looked at the photograph one more time. My parents young and in love, before greed and death rewrote their story. Then I fed it to the suite's fireplace, watching their faces curl and disappear into smoke. I don't have a family, I said peacefully. I have a legacy. That's worth more than blood that would spill yours for money. The next morning's board meeting was swift and surgical. Richard didn't attend. His lawyers had advised against it. My mother sent a letter through her attorney, 2 pages of apologies and justifications that contradicted each other. I had my assistant file it without reading past the first line. Marcus posted a rant on social media about corporate theft and family betrayal. Within an hour, former employees of Stewart Industries began sharing their own stories of wage theft and hostile work environments. His account went private by noon, then disappeared entirely by evening. I instituted my changes methodically. Every employee Richard had cheated received back pay with interest. Every patent filed under suspicious circumstances was investigated and properly attributed. The company pivoted toward medical technology that would have made my father weep with pride. Biosensors that could detect cancer cells before symptoms appeared. Diagnostic tools that brought first-world medicine to third-world villages. 6 months later, my mother appeared in the lobby of Chen Innovations. Security called up, uncertain. She says she's your mother, the guard reported. Should we? Ask her if she has an appointment, I interrupted. If not, give her a business card. She can contact my assistant to schedule a meeting like anyone else. I watched on the security monitor as the guard relayed my message. My mother's face, older now, designer clothes replaced with department store basics, crumbled. But she took the card. She left without making a scene. She never called. Revenge is a dish best served cold, they say. But success is a banquet you serve yourself, at a table you built, in a house you own, surrounded by people who see your worth. They wanted me to serve them. Instead, I built an empire where they couldn't even afford a reservation. 5 years later, I stood in the same basement where I'd once slept, on a bare mattress, my back scarred from a belt wielded by people who called themselves family. It wasn't a basement anymore. The Chen Foundation had transformed it into a state-of-the-art computer lab, part of the shelter we'd built, where my childhood home once stood. 24 workstations hummed with possibility. The walls that had once trapped me now displayed certificates from kids who'd used these computers to escape their own basements. Miss Chen? A 16-year-old girl stood in the doorway, laptop clutched to her chest like armor. I'm Maya. I have my interview for the scholarship program. She had that look, the one I'd worn for years. Eyes that had seen too much, shoulders that carried invisible weight. A defensive hunch that said she expected rejection before she'd even asked for anything. Her jacket was too thin for November, held closed with a safety pin where buttons should be. Come in, Maya. I gestured to the chairs, ergonomic, supportive, nothing like the concrete floor I'd known. Tell me about your project. She opened her laptop, ancient, held together with duct tape, running software I recognized from my library days. But on the screen was code, beautiful, elegant code that made my breath catch. It's a resource allocation app, she said quietly. For homeless shelters, it tracks bed availability in real time, connects to food banks, sends alerts when spaces open up. I thought if people knew where to go, they wouldn't have to sleep in libraries. I had to turn away for a moment, ostensibly to pour water from the pitcher on the side table. Really to compose myself, to push down the memory of my own nights in library bathrooms. Washing my face in sinks meant for hand washing, not survival. How long have you been coding? I asked when I could trust my voice. 2 years since I left home. Since my mom chose her boyfriend over. She stopped, that same instinct I'd had to hide the ugly parts, to pretend the wounds weren't there. You don't have to tell me the details, I said gently. But you also don't have to hide them. Not here, not from someone who understands. Her eyes snapped to mine, wary but hopeful. You understand. Instead of answering directly, I pulled up my sleeve. The scar from climbing through the basement window had faded but never disappeared. A white line against brown skin, proof of the night I'd chosen freedom over family. I understand, I confirmed. Now show me what else you've built. For an hour, she walked me through projects created on borrowed time and borrowed computers. A mental health bot for teenagers afraid to talk to adults. A job search engine that didn't require a permanent address. Innovation born from desperation, brilliance forged in survival. The scholarship covers everything, I told her when she finished. Tuition, housing, meals, books, and a new laptop. But more than that, it covers hope. The kind that lets you dream beyond tomorrow. She cried then. Silent tears that she tried to hide. The kind you learn to shed when showing emotion is dangerous. I handed her tissues and my business card. My direct line, I said. For when you need someone who understands. And Maya, that app of yours, I want to fund it, full development, proper servers, marketing budget. But you retain all rights, your pain, your solution, your profit. After she left, walking taller, clutching a folder of paperwork that meant escape, I climbed the stairs to what had been my mother's sitting room. Now it was a communal space where residents learned job skills, attended therapy, rebuilt lives that others had tried to destroy. On the wall hung a portrait, not of me. I'd learned the danger of making myself the story. Instead, it was my father in his lab, surrounded by the biosensors that now saved lives globally. Below it, a plaque. Dr. James Chen, father, inventor, inspiration. His legacy lives in every life saved and every dream achieved. My phone buzzed. Richard's obituary had posted online. Heart attack at 65, the article said. Died alone in a studio apartment. His empire dissolved, his family scattered. Marcus had moved to Florida, selling timeshares to retirees. My mother lived quietly in a senior community, her bills paid by an anonymous benefactor who ensured she had exactly what she needed. Nothing more, nothing less. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not sorrow. Just the echo of old pain that had calcified into purpose. Dr. Martinez called while I was reading. He'd become my mentor, then my board member, now my friend. Saw the news about Richard, he said without preamble. How are you feeling? Like someone who survived a war that ended years ago, I admitted. The enemy's death doesn't bring back the dead or heal the wounded. It just is. Very philosophical, very unlike the angry girl who snuck into my coding seminar. She served her purpose, I said, watching through the window as Maya waited at the bus stop, her new future tucked under her arm. She got me here, but she's not who I am anymore. And who are you now? I thought about it, this question I'd been avoiding for 5 years. Who was I without the revenge quest, without the burning need to prove them wrong, without the anger that had fueled my rise? I'm a woman who builds ladders in the holes where others fell, I said finally. I'm someone who proves that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. I paused, the truth surprising me. I'm my father's daughter, finally, fully, without apology. That night, I returned to my penthouse, not to work for once, but to sit with the silence. My reflection in the window showed a woman I barely recognized. Successful beyond my teenage dreams, scarred but not broken, alone by choice, not circumstance. The $1 bill I'd carried for 9 years sat framed on my desk. Next to it, a new edition, Maya's scholarship application, where she'd written, I want to be like Sarah Chen, who built an empire from nothing and used it to make sure no one else had to start from nothing again. I'd won, not the revenge game that had ended years ago in a wedding ballroom. I'd won something harder, the battle to become someone worthy of the chances I'd fought to create. Someone my father would recognize, not for what I'd destroyed, but for what I'd built. My mother had been wrong about one thing above all. I'd never been nothing. I'd been a seed, planted in concrete, watered with tears, growing despite every attempt to uproot me. And now I was a forest, offering shade to others trying to grow in impossible ground. The city lights spread below me like a circuit board, each connection a life touched by programs I'd funded, shelters I'd built, scholarships I'd endowed. Somewhere out there, a girl was sleeping in a library planning her escape. Tomorrow she might find one of our outreach cards. might take that first step toward proving her worth to herself. The only person whose opinion truly mattered. That was my revenge. Not the takeover, not the money, not the public humiliation. My revenge was becoming someone who made their cruelty irrelevant, who transformed their worst act into my origin story, who took the belt they'd beaten me with and turned it into a ladder others could climb. They'd wanted to break me. Instead, they'd forged me. And in the end, that was the echo that would outlast us all. Not the sound of their fall, but the footsteps of everyone who rose, because I remembered what it felt like to have nowhere to rise from. My phone lit up with a text from Maya. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else would." I typed back, "Thank you for reminding me why I built this ladder in the first place. Now climb. And when you reach the top, build another one." Dignity isn't what they couldn't take from you. It's what you rebuild from the ashes they left behind. Success isn't the money you accumulate or the enemies you destroy. It's becoming someone who makes their opinion of you irrelevant. And the best revenge? It's living a life so full of purpose that you forget you were ever seeking revenge at all.